Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and
Hello.
welcome to today's webinar on identifying functional implications of mental health conditions. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. This webinar is sponsored by the Northeast and Caribbean Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, or MHTTC, housed at Rutgers in the School of Health Professions and the Department of Psychiatric Rehabilitation and Counseling Professions. My name is Kathy. I'm the project coordinator of the center, and we will be facilitating this webinar today. Next slide, please. If you're interested in staying up to date with the events and products the Northeast and Caribbean MHTTC is providing, please sign up to receive our email communications. You can sign up at the bit.ly link provided on the screen. Following the webinar, you'll be asked to complete a brief survey. We value this feedback and use it to improve our activities and inform future activities. The surveys are also important because our continued funding is linked to the completion of these surveys. So we thank you in advance for your feedback. And we also want to let you know this webinar is being recorded and will be posted to our website along with the PowerPoint slides in the next couple of days. This presentation was prepared for the Northeast and Caribbean Mental Health Technology Transfer Center under a cooperative agreement from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. All material appearing in this presentation, except that taken directly from copyrighted sources, is in the public domain and may be reproduced or copied without permission from SAMHSA or the authors. Citation of the source is appreciated. Do not reproduce or distribute this presentation for a fee without specific written or authorization from the Northeast and Caribbean MHTTC. This presentation will be recorded and posted on our website. At the time of this presentation, Tom Coder served as Acting Assistant Secretary for Mental Health and Substance Use at SAMHSA. The opinions expressed herein are the views of the speakers and do not reflect the official position of the Department of Health and Human Services, or SAMHSA. No official support or endorsement of DHHS, SAMHSA for the opinions described in this presentation is intended or should be inferred. We encourage you to interact with our presenters during the webinar by using the chat feature. Please post any comments or questions you have in the chat, and I will collect your question as we go and ask them of the presenter during the Q&A time towards the end of the presentation. During the webinar, our presenter may post questions to you, so please use the chat feature to answer those questions. The MHTTC network uses affirming, respectful, and recovery-oriented language in all activities. This includes language that is strengths-based and hopeful, language that is inclusive and accepting of diverse cultures, genders, perspectives, and experiences, language that is healing-centered and trauma-responsive, language that invites individuals to participate in their own recovery journey, language that is person-first and free of labels, language that is non-judgmental and avoiding assumptions, language that is respectful, clear, and understandable and consistent with our actions, policies, and products. Now let's begin our webinar. We have Joni Dolce with us today. Joni is an assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatric Rehabilitation and Counseling Professions at Rutgers School of Health Professions. Joni has several years of experience working in behavioral healthcare settings, namely supported employment. Joni teaches courses in the department's undergraduate program as well as provide training and technical assistance to behavioral healthcare providers. Her research interests include staff training and employment services. She presents nationally on the topic of employment services and is listed as a Society for Human Resource Management recommended speaker on the topic of creating workplaces that support mental health. Now, welcome everyone, and I'll turn this over to Joni.
Thank you, Kati. Welcome everyone. It's nice to be here again. Today we have a pretty packed agenda, and just to remind everyone that next week we're going to be having our more applied interactive webinar where you'll have a chance to identify someone that you're working with or individuals you're working with, and we can apply what we're learning today. So please ask questions, be involved today, but also remember that next week we'll have a full hour to review challenges, review obstacles that you may be encountering, and apply some of the material that we're going to be covering today. We're going to talk about some methods to assess the employment implications of mental health conditions. We're going to do a review of what some of the major mental health conditions are and some of the key features along with some of those employment implications and barriers to employment that what we might see in response to some of the symptoms or effects of the medication or effects of other treatment for some of the major mental health conditions that we talked about in previous weeks. We're also going to talk about how to look at some of the ways to determine the need for supports or skill development. I have a couple of tools, one in particular that I'll share that a colleague had reworked from some additional materials that we find pretty useful when we are working with individuals to determine some support needs. And then finally, we'll describe the impact of the functional implications of a mental health condition on employment. And again, this is the first in kind of, I don't want to say a series, but a pair of webinars really focusing on looking at the implications and how to apply some of what we learned next week. And then the following week, we're going to pull it all together and talk about how we can link the functional implications, support needs, skill development needs to specific accommodations and talk more specifically about the supports and accommodations for individuals to help with success on the job. So just a very quick review. Last week we talked about, or the week before and last week, several of the major mental health conditions. I'll just do a quick review on some of the key ones that we reviewed. We talked about individuals who have a diagnosis of schizophrenia, and some of the key features that we saw in the previous weeks, or you might be familiar with, are the positive symptoms, including hallucinations, where someone might hear voices or see things, smell things, having more auditory or visual or olfactory hallucinations, or even feeling different tactile hallucinations. They're very real to the person. One of the implications of that is it could feel very confusing for someone, disorienting for others to witness that. People may also have delusions, which are false beliefs that really don't change and stay pretty consistent, even in spite of information presented to them to the contrary. They might be delusions that are persecutory. They might feel that someone might be after them. They might be grandiose. They might have, the person might feel that they have a heightened sense of importance or meaning. The negative symptoms that we talked about include some of those features that diminish the person's affect. They might have limited emotion. They might speak in dull and disconnected ways. Negative symptoms might appear in ways that look like someone isn't goal-directed or might be stunted in their goal-directed behaviors. And then finally, there are some cognitive issues or disorganized thinking involved with individuals with schizophrenia. People might have a hard time remembering things. People might have a hard time organizing their thoughts, completing tasks, and so on. And then individuals with bipolar disorder might have different periods of elevated mood, which is called mania, or prolonged periods of sadness, which are the more depressive end or the more depressive pole. Some signs and symptoms might be an inflated sense of self-esteem or grandiosity. People may be more talkative, may have less need or ability to sleep. Excessive involvement in potentially risky behaviors might also be a sign or symptom. And then, of course, when we're talking about someone with depression, that feeling of hopelessness, lack of interest in pleasurable activities, potential sleep issues, could be insomnia, could be sleeping too much, weight concerns. So someone may lose weight or may gain weight, fatigue or loss of energy, or just a feeling of worthlessness and guilt. So just to kind of move into our discussion with that in mind, we are going to be talking about some of the symptoms related to a mental health condition and how they impact someone's employment, and specifically how we can, as providers, help someone identify potential supports or accommodations. And again, that will be our final of the three mental health discussions or webinars on this topic. So what are some of the reasons, and specifically one reason, or what's the rationale that we would want to explore these employment implications of mental health conditions, or why is it important to look at this in this way? You can use your chat or unmute your mic. Kati will, if you want to raise your hand, she'll unmute your mic, or you can just use the chat and she'll help me look at the chat box so we can answer some of these questions. But what's one reason to explore the implications, specifically the employment implications of mental health conditions? Okay. It's who we serve, whether we realize it or not. Absolutely, Rebecca. So individuals may not disclose, but there may be supports and resources that we can provide. So helping someone to be successful, make a good job match, be a successful fit, help our participants be most successful on the job, to anticipate possible or probable difficulties and have solutions in mind and in place to determine potential barriers with successful employment, to explore supports and accommodations if applicable. Absolutely. So we want to be able to, and then we have some more coming in, to be able to address employer concerns, lack of understanding about mental health conditions. Absolutely. Get a better understanding of the types of supports and best workplace cultural fits. So we really are using this information to help someone develop the supports necessary, develop the resources that are needed, improve skill in areas so that they can be successful in the job. Yes, Nancy, absolutely, to develop accommodations. So we want to use this information today to begin linking to supports and linking to possible accommodations. We want people to be successful. We want people to work in jobs that are good matches, but also if the person needs the support or needs the accommodation, we want to be aware of what those barriers might be to help that person find a good job fit, which someone said in here, and also to develop those accommodations or resources. Someone also mentions it also allows us to discover what worked in the past for them. Absolutely. So just as a reminder for the chat box, if you can, it's automatically going to all panelists. So right now it's just Kati and I seeing the chat. If you could make sure in that small drop-down menu when you're writing in the chat that you have it to everyone or all panelists and attendees, just so everyone is able to see the chat if you prefer. If you want just Kati and I to see the chat, then certainly just use panelists. Great, so you guys certainly hit it right on the head with this. So let's move right into, since this is a very brief webinar, let's move into what is an employment implication of a mental health condition. So it really is how the related symptoms of the mental health condition affect the worker in the work setting. So how it directly affects the person in the work setting. We may assess outside of the work setting. So it may be that the person hasn't worked or doesn't have a large amount of experience or a great amount of experience. So how is the mental health related symptom affecting the person outside of the work? And how do the symptoms of the mental health condition impact the person in completing job tasks? Again, just mentioning that this would be very different based on the environment. So one person may, or based on the person or based on the job description. So one person may flourish in a certain environment, and someone with a similar diagnosis or similar symptoms may have a hard time. So this does vary. And again, you all know one size does not fit all. So very individualized assessments, really looking at the person very much just based on their needs and what their specific support needs might be. So when we look at assessing the employment implications of mental health symptoms, we want to really help the worker to examine how their daily functioning might be affected or impacted by the presence of a mental health condition. So the person, as I mentioned, may not have worked in a while. The person may have limited work experience. They may not be currently working. So really looking at how that daily functioning might be affected or impacted by the presence of a mental health condition. And what barrier does that cause? And we're going to break this down and use some forms to really look at what the symptom might be, what the employment implication might be, or the barrier that it causes. And also looking at not just the mental health condition and the symptoms related to the mental health condition, but are medications or the treatment of the mental health condition causing side effects? Are these side effects impacting or causing barriers at work? And then finally, what do these limitations or how do these limitations affect the person's ability to perform in the employment environment? So the limitations might impact performance related to interpersonal interactions or different behaviors or other types of employment specific impacts. So looks like we have a couple of chat. Let's see. So let me just, okay, so one of the chat says to be able to address employer concerns. So yes, that's great. Working in an environment where they have to interact with lots of people. If the person is paranoid, for instance, that might not be a good fit. You can manage who see, okay, yeah. Thank you, Kati. Someone mentions in the chat, hearing voices, may need a job with less stimulation, side effects of medications, unsteady hands, cannot work with machinery. Yes, you're right. You're right on track with what we're beginning to discuss today, Nancy, is how do we determine that? How do we help the person really understand what a good fit might be or what environment might be the best fit, or how can we help develop those resources or accommodations or supports to really help that person better able to be more successful and able to do the essential functions of the job. And next week, or the week after, when we talk about accommodations, we're really going to get into the weeds about the essential functions. What are they? What do they look like? What are job accommodations? But for today, we're just focusing very much on just this aspect. So we want to talk about some examples. So the limitations. So I'm going to give you some examples based on kind of universal or more general symptoms that someone might experience or a limitation that someone might experience and what that might look like on the job. So for example, someone might have an inability to concentrate, and we know that that may be related to many of the mental health conditions that we've reviewed. Someone who has disorganized thinking, or someone who might be experiencing hallucinations, may have an inability to concentrate. Someone who's depressed, someone who is has an elevated mood, if the person is experiencing mania, that might have a hard time. They might have a hard time concentrating. And what that looks like could be focusing on one task for a long period of time. So what we want to begin doing is helping someone identify what is that potential limitation, what is that problem or barrier that they may have encountered in the past, and what could that look like on the job, or what does that look like for the person on the job. The person might have decreased stamina, right? So the person might have a hard time staying alert or physically having the stamina to complete maybe a full day of work. So really beginning to look at some of these limitations, difficulty handling pressures or multiple tasks. So someone with certain mental health conditions may have a difficult time moving from task to task or working under certain time pressures. That might look like difficulty prioritizing, difficulty figuring out what should I prioritize, what should I work on next. People might have a hard time interacting with others, and that could be due to, again, maybe the impact of the mental health condition itself or the symptoms related to a mental health condition. Could also be medication related. If people have different side effects of the medication that may diminish interactions or feeling confident to interact with people. And that could look like an uncertainty of what the work culture is about. So this feeling that you're unable or having a hard time interacting, that could be just really kind of in that work environment, not sure how people are responding to one another, not sure how the work culture is. So what are some examples, just very quickly, of what work culture might look like? You can use the chat or unmute your mic. I'm just looking at the chat now, and people responded to that question. Yep, so some of the work culture responses are handling critique or criticism by supervisors, holiday gatherings, lunch breaks, settings, routines, celebrations, B-days, etc. Absolutely. So if a person has difficulty interacting with others, it might be hard for them to really engage in that work culture and understand what is expected of them within that work culture. Some additional examples might be someone might have a hard time handling negative criticism. So that might look like the person potentially getting defensive to a colleague or a supervisor, or they may believe that they can't change or make those corrections. So they begin to feel hopeless or worthless on the job. The person may have an inability to screen out environmental stimuli. So a person might not be able to focus on certain tasks, or if they're close to a copy machine, or if they're in a highly, high traffic area of their office, it might be difficult for that person to screen out chatter and the noise. And that might look like, again, working in those high traffic areas. So these are just some examples, and this website is through Boston University's Center Psych Rehab, School of Psych Rehab Center, and they have lots of additional resources. So I left this up here, and then let's see, we have some other chats. How to voice concerns and who to go to. Absolutely. Work that requires teamwork, professional mannerisms. So those soft skills and interpersonal skills that may be difficult for individuals to master because of low vocational maturity or vocational immaturity. The person may not have had many employment experiences to really understand how to interact with individuals in a professional way. difficulties adjusting to change or transition to the demands of work. For example, absolutely, Felicia, those remote working environments, that's a big adjustment that people may have had to make. And we're right now just talking about the limitation and how it might look, that sort of outward employment implication, or what that looks like on the job. We're going to really look at what solutions could be helpful in our next training. Nancy wrote, and they should be placed in settings that don't highlight their weaknesses. Yes, I think you're bringing up a good point that I had intended to make earlier on in the presentation, that we, again, want to focus on strengths. So we want to find job matches that really focus on the strengths of the person, that really help highlight skills, highlight already in place natural supports that the person might have, and try to diminish or minimize any of the weaknesses. So really trying to find those types of employment settings that will be conducive to the person's skills and strengths, I think is really key. Thank you for bringing that up, Nancy. Dealing with change in general is also another example of a possible employment limitation, and what that might look like is possibly the person unable to take on additional tasks, or unable to work in a remote setting if they're used to working face-to-face. So that could be a certain barrier for many people. One way of really helping someone assess what their support needs might be is a colleague of mine, Michelle Mullen, and one of her coworkers created a support planning checklist that I'll show you. And it kind of goes through, and Kati will send this out with the materials, but it goes through several areas focusing on, the psychological, resource needs, behaviors, and so on. And you can help the person really look at problems that they may have had in the past, whether it's related to employment, past employment opportunities that they've been engaged with, or school, or even just in their daily life. But it helps give you some sort of indication of where the person's skill or support needs might be. So I'm going to start sharing that. Let's see. Kati, I'm just gonna, oh, here it is. Kati, can you see the support planning worksheet?
Yes.
Okay, so again, it's very lengthy, and it's not something that maybe every person needs to complete, but if you're working with someone who may not have a clear work history, or maybe they haven't worked or gone to school in quite some time, and they're uncertain of where they might, what support needs might need to be in place, this sort of goes through a checklist, and this could be done with the person, over a course of a couple of different meetings, or it could be if the person would like to do this on their own and bring it back with you. Some of the questions, are pretty personal, but again, the intent is to help the person really examine and look at what are the support needs, so that I can access needed accommodations, or I can access necessary supports that I might need to be successful in the job. So again, when you orient the person to using this type of support planning checklist, again, orient them to the fact that this is going to highlight some areas of support. So some of the questions might really focus on some of that more negative aspects or deficit elements of the person. So this type of checklist you want to do kind of after you've established some relationship, after you've really looked at strengths and you've looked at what the skills might be. So for example, when you look at the psychosocial skills, it's difficult for me to ask for help. I tend to stay away from people at work. Sometimes I feel withdrawn, even when I'm around people. Easy to misinterpret what others say, and it just goes on into communication skills and a cluster. I interrupt others quite a bit. Sometimes I don't answer others or respond with only 1 or 2 words, and sometimes people may not know how to answer some of these questions, and that's okay, but it's again, to put some thought into what supports might be helpful, what planning might be necessary for the person to be successful. Concentration and thinking, perception, thoughts about relationships. So kind of getting at those interpersonal, professional skills that we were just talking about in the chat, social skills, treatment needs, and so on. So it's about 3 pages and kind of runs the gamut of the clusters of support needs. Emotions, sometimes I worry so much it's hard to be at work. So again, if that person identifies this as a concern, then that's certainly something that you can plan around or work through. And having the discussion with the person and asking open-ended questions regarding these different clusters of skill or support needs could also get at some of these same support needs without asking in a checklist format. So for example, you might ask about previous jobs, you might ask about previous education experiences, volunteer experiences, interactions at home. But this is just one tool. And again, an old colleague of mine, Michelle Mullen, and her colleague at the time, Lynn Legier, adapted this from what's referenced here, and their adaptation was much later than 1995. So this is, fairly current, I'm sure, and it may have been updated even since. So I will hand that off to Kati so that she can make sure you have that. And let me just make sure I'm back onto. Kati, are you able to see my screen?
I see the other screen.
Oh, okay. Let me just make sure. Thank you for, okay. How's that?
That's perfect.
Okay, good. So it looks like we have a couple of chats. Okay, so sometimes people don't recognize their weaknesses even when we try to address them. Absolutely. So that it may not be something that someone is able to articulate or identify. And certainly we want to make sure that we're mindful of some of those other system issues when someone is meeting with you, that person may have gone through, maybe negative experiences in different systems that they've been interacting with, and they may have been, I don't know, told that they're unable to do work or go to school or unable to do certain things. So they may have developed what's called an illness identity, and they may be coming to you with this illness identity and this belief that they're unable to work or feel competent enough to work. So we want to be mindful of that as well. Yes, it can be, yep, we'll share it. People are pointing out helpful when supporting folks for their own self-awareness, absolutely, how they present to others, conversation opportunities. So, okay. Would the assessment make people feel like they have more limitations? That's Rebecca's writing to the panelists. Would the assessment make people feel like they have more limitations? That's a potential, and that's why maybe something like this isn't brought out initially. Maybe this is something that if the person needs to really further examine and unable to articulate to you what their support needs are, or you're having a hard time really assessing what support needs the person might need. This may not be helpful in nurturing the relationship or building the relationship. Certainly start out in a very strengths-based, very skills-based conversation first, looking at what the person's good at, what the person has excelled in, what the person's personality strengths might be. And then as that relationship develops and built on those skills and built on a strengths focus, then perhaps using something like this, because you certainly, as you mentioned, Rebecca, you don't want to highlight limitations. You don't want to highlight support needs, but you also can even do some very timed and appropriate self-disclosure and say, we all have support needs. And many of these areas are support needs that many people have. And if you feel comfortable disclosing what potentially some of your support needs might have been, or what you have in place, or if you're able to even, if someone's really feeling negative about themselves or negative about their ability to work, and that all they see are limitations, maybe even have opportunities for the person to talk to others who have gone back to work and have been successful, to sort of feel that peer support and that work is possible and positive. So what are some additional ways that you are able to assess what someone's functional implications of the mental health condition might be? What are some ways that you've used in the past? The website here is the Job Accommodation Network, and they have a variety of different materials and resources. One specific resource that I find very useful is a list of the different diagnoses or mental health conditions that you might encounter. And it also gives some of those limitations that the potential employee might experience. So they kind of highlight underneath bipolar disorder what some of those limitations might be. You can certainly go on the website and check that out. And it gives some examples, again, may not relate to every person you're working with who has a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, but it could give you some tools or strategies to look at to help when you're identifying accommodations. It looks like we have, okay, Nancy's writing the PROS program, absolutely community-based work assessment. Those are some additional ways to assess psychiatric evaluation. PROS programs can address various areas and give support, absolutely. And I believe the PROS programs also have opportunities for people to work together in group settings, and maybe even have some sort of opportunity for people to talk with others who have been successful or who have gone back to work and kind of share some of those experiences. Vocational evaluations might be useful while they are being evaluated for skills. That can also observe behaviors. Job coaching can help certain individuals. Career one-stop website, yes, that they have the videos of all of the different types of occupations that can really help participants learn more, who lean more towards visual learning, what to expect in regards to employment. I love those little video brief snippets of illustrating what a specific occupation is. I think they're great. So having discussions, talking with people about past experiences. What did you like? What didn't you like? Really using some motivational interviewing to really kind of get at what some of the person's past experiences looked like. Were they successful? What might not have been successful? And help the person look at what some of the features of those unsuccessful experiences might have been, to help the person really look at potential support needs or accommodations that could be in place to really improve success and enhance that person's ability to stay connected with the job or move into a different job. So this determining accommodations worksheet, very simple. identifies the mental health condition, symptoms that are potentially related to the mental health condition. And again, based on the individual. So not everyone with schizophrenia experiences negative symptoms or disorganized thinking. What's the functional implication, limitation, or barrier that the person is experiencing related to employment? And then this final column is the possible supports or accommodations that, again, we'll use in our future training to really link these implications to possible supports. So this is just an example of a couple of symptoms related to schizophrenia. So someone with negative symptoms, specifically diminished emotional expression or alogia that we talked about, that diminished speech. One of the barriers, work-related implications might be interacting with others, interacting with coworkers, interacting with your supervisor. And then we can look at what possible supports or accommodations could help address that. Right now, we're really trying to get a better understanding of what some of the impact of the mental health condition or even the treatment or medication that the person is taking has on the job, so that we can, again, help connect them to supports and resources and accommodations, which we'll follow up with in a couple of weeks. Someone who has a symptom of disorganized thinking, whether it's related to schizophrenia or another mental health condition, one of the limitations or employment-related barriers might be understanding job tasks or following instructions. So then we can, again, identify a solution, whether that's an actual accommodation through the ADA, or if it's something more informal and the person is able to have a support in place naturally or through the job. So we're going to talk about that, but this is just to get you thinking. And then we have a brief kind of example of a person. I know it's sort of tiny, but maybe it's coming across a little larger on your end. But we can just, I'll quickly read this. But this is a kind of an example of someone who is working, and we're going to be pulling out some of the symptoms that Kurt is experiencing. So as I'm reading through it, or you're reading through it, pull out what symptoms he's experiencing, try to identify what the impact on his employment might be, or what that functional implication in terms of his employment looks like. What are some of the barriers that he's experiencing? And then we're going to, at some point next week, the week after, talk about what solutions. So Kurt is an office manager for a local nonprofit organization. He's been treated in the past for symptoms related to his bipolar disorder. His job tasks include filing monthly activity reports, coordinating training events for the training team, assisting the director with scheduling fundraiser events, and completing the annual budget. In past jobs, he has always had difficulty meeting deadlines and staying focused on specific tasks. Luckily, his job is flexible with deadlines, and he can work from home when he has difficulty concentrating. Kurt's job duties have changed, and he is now supervising 3 office staff. He is required to be in the office at least 3 days a week. Because he is constantly interrupted by the office staff he now oversees, he's having an even more difficult time concentrating and staying focused. Kurt's getting little sleep at night, which impacts his concentration even more. He's having a difficult time remembering the additional job duties he is required to perform, and has been struggling to pay attention during these mandatory meetings. He's not meeting his required deadlines, he's not sleeping at night, and he's becoming quite tired with little stamina. His attendance is suffering, and he's also late a lot during the week. He's having a hard time dealing with these workplace changes, and he's considering leaving the job because of this added stress. So let's look at, so what is Kurt's mental health condition? Okay, so we know that Kurt's mental health condition is a bipolar disorder. What are the symptoms that Kurt is experiencing? Lack of focus. Yep. Thank you, Keith. Difficulty concentrating, poor sleep, depression symptoms, can't organize. So what are the impacts on employment? What are the functional implications or limitations that he's currently experiencing? So what are those work-related implications? Attendance issues, has trouble meeting deadlines, he's having an inability to complete his responsibilities, absolutely. Decreased stamina, he has difficulties with supervising, he's having a hard time maintaining focus on his employment tasks, he wants to quit. So there are implications, he's feeling overwhelmed with his job duties. Unless he gets a reevaluation and gets meds adjusted, he may not end well. And it may or may not be medication related, right? It may be other wellness concerns or challenges that he might be experiencing. So the bottom line is these symptoms are creating barriers and impacting his ability to complete certain tasks, to be fully engaged and successful on the job. Yes, Nancy, in any case, certainly needs to have some sort of reevaluation or reassessment. Jesse, he's burnt out with all the problems he is facing when working. Yes, so that burnout we know is really can negatively impact how we function on the job and how successful we are. So let's kind of look at using the same determining accommodations worksheet, again, with that right column, not filled out yet, but the mental health condition is bipolar disorder. Symptoms, many of what you all just said could fit in here. People had mentioned inability to concentrate, this distractibility, the way it's sort of creating a barrier or work implication is that he's having a hard time completing his tasks in time. And then we'll talk about possible supports and accommodations, but that's just one sort of example of someone who is experiencing symptoms and how they're impacting his particular work environment, or how what some of the concerns or problems he's experiencing are. So just to summarize, it's we have about 10 minutes left for questions and answers. Talked about the functional implications of mental health condition, described some common work-related implications, and then we looked at ways to assess individuals' work-related support needs using that checklist, also having discussions with people about past employment experiences, past educational experiences that might help inform support needs and skill development areas for future employment or careers. Are there any questions that people have? What are some questions that you might have? Looks like there are a few questions in the chat. Okay, Nancy, is from the previous, if ignored, it could end up in hospitalization. Absolutely. A job coach can help organize some of those tasks. So we'll wait a few minutes to see if there are any Q&A before we move into sort of that prep work for our next.
Tony, someone had shared before a question in the chat. Does shadowing work for individuals to assess themselves? I don't, Rebecca.
Okay, so job shadowing, does job shadowing work for someone to assess where their skills are? Absolutely. I think job shadowing is a great way for someone to further explore a career. It also might be helpful to see as you're shadowing someone, maybe the person can identify different areas to look at that might help them in terms of assessing their own skill or support needs. So for example, if someone's shadowing someone in a bank environment as a bank teller, and maybe seeing how the teller interacts with customers, and even just those soft skills we talked about, the smiling, the engaging, and maintaining eye contact, really helping the individual look at how, is that something that they can see themselves doing, or how might they perform in that type of job, and maybe using that shadow experience, helping the person really think of clear questions that they want to either ask the person they're shadowing, or follow up with the voc rehab counselor or the job coach after the shadowing experience, to really help use that opportunity in a way that helps to develop some increased awareness of maybe what their interests are, as well as potential support needs.
Thank you. Someone had just also provided more feedback and said that based on the case scenario, Kurt just changed jobs.
Mhm.
Even people without mental health conditions can have a hard time when starting a new job or taking on new tasks. And we don't necessarily have to over pathologize his difficulties.
Yes, I think
Mhm.
you're bringing up a great point. We certainly don't want to do that, Michelle. We don't want to make it seem like, just because of his disability, he's having this hard time, but we also do want to provide the necessary supports and accommodations if it is something that is negatively impacting his job due to his symptoms, or due to other functional implications of his mental health condition. We certainly don't want to over pathologize sorry, any of this. We want to make sure that if people are not wanting, if that job isn't a good fit, and the increased responsibilities or different types of job tasks that he's now required to do isn't something that he's interested in or feels is a good match, that, again, like you mentioned, Michelle, can happen to anyone. We can all feel that it's just not a good match, and we move on. So helping that person look at how to move on, how to use this experience to inform future positions. Absolutely. It looks like, Michelle, you have your hand raised if you wanted to.
Yeah, I'll allow to talk right now. Okay, you should have the ability to speak. If you can unmute
Yes, I
yourself.
got it, Kati. Thank you. Yeah, I didn't want to imply that the difficulties he's experiencing or the symptoms that we're seeing should be ignored. I think it's really important to address them and to make sure that they don't get worse. But I did want to point out that I think, it's just a stressful time in anyone's life, and everybody can show some kinds of things. And I think it could be helpful to this individual as well to sort of point that out and say, that some of the things you're experiencing might be because you're going through a change that is stressful for anybody.
Absolutely. Universally, this is a very stressful environment, right? Many people are experiencing that similar stress. And again, to sort of normalize a situation helps to minimize that illness identity, right? Helps us to help the person, have more of an identity of a worker. And it's not just because of the illness, but it could, very well be just a very stressful position that many people find challenging or difficult. I thank you for bringing that up. I think that's really important.
So Joni, while everyone else is formulating their questions, if you could please move the slide along to our QR code.
Yep.
Thank you.
There was another question about, is there a list of accommodations for each disability? Yes. Let me just go back to that really quickly. It's here on this website, Ask Jan A to Z. It's they do have a list of different disabilities And then I think this takes you right to a whole menu of different disabilities. You can click into each of those, and they even parse it out by diagnoses. So you can go in there and look at different symptoms that might, or the impact of the mental health condition. So for example, under schizophrenia, it might have inability to concentrate or disorganized thinking. You click into that, and then you can look at, okay, what are some accommodations? What are some even assistive technologies that can be helpful for someone who's experiencing that? So this website, the Ask Jan, and I also have it listed in our resources, has so many kind of crosswalks that you could use. It's the Job Accommodation Network, and they have you know, a wealth of information. They have people who are available to do online chats, to do you know, in person. You can pick up the phone and talk to someone who has a specific area of expertise in different disability related focuses. So yes, the Job Accommodation Network has that, and we're going to talk more about those specific accommodations to match to different symptoms or other implications of the mental health condition. But that's a great question. I don't think I missed any more questions, so I'm going to go to our prep work. So in preparation for next week, we're going to be doing some more hands-on work, really exploring challenges related to this topic. So if you want to come prepared to discuss a challenge that you're currently experiencing or have in the past related to looking at the functional implications of a mental health condition, looking at identifying or assessing what some of those support needs might be. And then we can review the challenges as a group, get feedback and support from one another, provide some resources and different suggestions. So that full hour next week will really be spent hands-on applying what we learned today. And then Kati, here's the, just very quickly, the BU Center for Psych Rehab information that I had shared earlier has some additional resources that talk about specific symptoms, what the example looks like, and then also possible solutions or supports. And then the Job Accommodation Network is listed here, as well as some other resources with the ADA that we'll talk a little bit more next week about, our mental health resources, and then the QR code for the evaluation.
Thank you, Joni. Yes, I just entered the Job Accommodation Network website in the chat. Someone wasn't able to access it. So thank you again. You all are so wonderful, interactive during our webinars, and always come so prepared with so many questions and examples. And it shows how much dedication you have in this career path. Also, I just wanted to mention, so in addition to sending everyone follow-up emails with, of course, the survey links, the link to the presentation and the recording, the slides and the certificates, I'm going to also forward the webinar series brochure that has all of the registration links, just to ensure that everyone is properly registering for each session. So just to reiterate, to participate in each session, you have to go to each registration link. So it's not a one link for all. It's basically, you have to register for each session. So I just wanted to remind participants that are with us today, so that way you don't miss out. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. My email, I will put it in the chat box right now. And all CRC credits are issued by ACCES-VR, and they're the ones who you would contact for any follow-up questions. Okay, so thank you, Joni, once again. I just realized we're at the top of the hour, so I just want to respect everyone's time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all, and we hope to see you next week for our applied session. Have a good day.